Agatha Raisin and the Trouble with the Vicar's Wife. A perfect village, a flawless smile, and a secret that turns sanctity into something deadly. Settle in for scandal, poison, and sharp-tongued sleuthing. And tell us, where in the world are you listening from tonight? Subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Spring sunlight slanted through the stained glass windows of St. James's Church, doing its best to lend the congregation a look of sanctity it did not entirely deserve. The light scattered over the polished pews, over bonnets of various ambitions, and finally over Agatha Raisin, who was trying to appear devout while mentally compiling a list of people she disliked. It was a long list and growing by the minute. The cause of the latest edition stood at the front, arranging hymn books with the graceful bustle of a woman conscious of being watched. Melissa Anstruther, the new vicar's wife, was the sort of woman Agatha distrusted on sight, tall, willowy, and possessed of that effortless confidence which suggested she believed life existed for her personal improvement. "Doesn't she look radiant?" murmured Mrs. Bloxby beside Agatha, clasping her hands. "Radiant women are usually trouble," Agatha muttered, tugging at her jacket. She had chosen what she believed a chic ensemble: navy skirt, fitted blazer, and a hat that implied London sophistication. But next to Melissa's floaty linen and tasteful pearls, she felt overdressed and under-serene. Melissa turned, her smile a beam of inclusive benevolence. "Good morning, everyone. What a joy to see such a crowd on this glorious day." Agatha's internal response to that joy was unprintable. The congregation tittered approvingly. Even Bill Wong, sitting several pews ahead with his mother, risked a look back that seemed perilously close to amusement. The service began, though service was perhaps too formal a word. Melissa had introduced contemporary fellowship, which meant substituting the old hymns with tuneless songs accompanied by a guitar wielded by the vicar himself. Agatha endured the first verse stoically, but by the second her patience frayed. The chorus demanded clapping. Agatha did not clap. She folded her arms and glared at the stained glass of St. Cecilia until the ordeal passed. When at last the sermon was over and the congregation drifted toward coffee, Melissa glided down the aisle like a benevolent hostess. She paused at Agatha's pew. "Mrs. Raisin, isn't it? I've heard so much about your remarkable energy in village matters, and what a brave choice of colour. Navy can be so unforgiving unless one has confidence." Agatha's smile froze. Brave indeed, a word that could mean anything from daring to disastrous. "Thank you," she said sweetly. "And how clever of you to manage yoga and the parish at the same time. Must keep you frightfully flexible." Melissa laughed, apparently missing the sting. "Oh, one must stretch body and soul, don't you think?" "Mine prefers gin," said Agatha. Mrs. Bloxby, ever the peacekeeper, slipped between them with gentle tact. "Agatha's humour can be rather direct, my dear, but her heart's in the right place." "Of course," said Melissa, unperturbed. "I'm counting on everyone's help. We're planning a little something for the church roof, our first village talent gala. Isn't that exciting?" "Depends on the talent," said Agatha. Melissa's eyes twinkled. "I'm sure we'll discover hidden gifts. Perhaps you'd help with publicity. You've such a flair for organisation." Flair, thought Agatha darkly, usually meant no one else will do it. But before she could refuse, Mrs. Bloxby was nodding on her behalf. Agatha would be perfect, she said, and so the trap was sprung. Outside, the churchyard shimmered with daffodils and self-satisfaction. Villagers clustered in gossiping knots, discussing Melissa's every gesture. Agatha lingered, pretending to admire a headstone while listening. "They say she's turned the vicarage into something out of country living," whispered one woman. "She's got the treasurer running errands like a puppy," said another. "Did you see the way he blushed when she spoke to him?" Agatha's ears pricked. The treasurer, Mr. Henry Parslow, was a widower of long standing and the sort who could make the word budget sound indecent. He was at that moment unloading cakes from his car, his face pink under its dome of baldness. Melissa fluttered nearby, supervising with gracious command. Agatha watched them narrowly. There was something in the tilt of Melissa's head, half gratitude, half something else, that made her wonder. It was not romance exactly, more like manipulation in soft focus. "She'll wear him to the bone," Agatha murmured. "Now, Agatha," said Mrs. Bloxby, appearing at her shoulder, "perhaps she only means to bring new life to the parish. If she brings any more, we'll need planning permission." Bill Wong approached, his expression caught between amusement and sympathy. "You'll give her a chance, won't you, Mrs. Raisin?" "I'll give her what she deserves," said Agatha, "which at the moment is an honest opinion and a pair of earmuffs." Bill chuckled. "You just don't like being upstaged." "Rubbish. I simply object to sanctimonious smoothies who think gluten-free scones make them moral." He raised an eyebrow. "You are going to the gala meeting, though?" Agatha sighed. "Apparently. Mrs. Bloxby volunteered me." "Then you'll find out if there's any trouble beneath that halo." "There always is," said Agatha. "Halos are magnets for dust." By the time Agatha reached home, her irritation had ripened. The cottage kitchen smelled of last night's curry and neglected ambition. She made coffee strong enough to dissolve regrets and paced before the window. Through it she could see the lane, hedgerows blooming, the sky too blue for her mood. She was not jealous, at least, not exactly. But something about Melissa's serene perfection stirred the old ache of inadequacy that London success had never quite cured. Agatha had clawed her way out of Birmingham drudgery to PR triumphs, only to find herself here, competing for social approval with a woman who baked virtue into muffins. She told herself she didn't care, and poured another cup. The phone rang. "Agatha, dear, it's Mrs. Bloxby. I forgot to tell you. The gala committee meets at the vicarage on Thursday evening. Melissa hopes you'll bring ideas for publicity." "Publicity for a roof," said Agatha. "How thrilling." "Try to be kind," the vicar's wife said gently. Agatha softened. She could never quite resist Mrs. Bloxby's calm goodness. "I'll come, but if she offers herbal tea, I'm leaving." Mrs. Bloxby laughed softly. "You'll manage her, Agatha. You always do." When the line went dead, Agatha caught her reflection in the kettle. Sharp eyes, determined jaw, lipstick a fraction smudged. "You'll manage her," she mimicked. "We'll see who manages whom." Thursday arrived with deceptive mildness. Evening light bathed Castley in gold, the kind of warmth that suggested nothing unpleasant could ever happen in such a place. Agatha, armed with her laptop and cynicism, walked to the vicarage. Inside, Melissa presided like a hostess at a house and garden feature. The sitting room glowed with lamps, cushions arranged with military precision. There were even scented candles, something floral that made Agatha sneeze. "Lovely to see you," said Melissa, handing round a tray. "Gluten-free lemon drizzle." Agatha eyed the cake as though it might lecture her on self-improvement. "I'll pass, thank you." The committee assembled. Mrs. Bloxby, the vicar, Mr. Parslow, and several villagers eager to display civic virtue. Discussion fluttered like a trapped bird. Ideas for acts, decorations, ticket prices. Melissa orchestrated every opinion with graceful diplomacy. Agatha's attempt to suggest a straightforward raffle met with gentle correction. "Oh, Agatha, darling, raffles feel so, what's the word, municipal. We want something more experiential." "Such as?" "Perhaps a mindfulness corner, or poetry readings by candlelight." Agatha's eyebrow climbed. People come to a gala for a laugh, not a nervous breakdown. A ripple of laughter followed, though Melissa's smile cooled slightly. The vicar coughed into his hand. "Let's revisit that later," Melissa said. As the meeting wound down, Agatha noticed Mr. Parslow lingering by the window, avoiding Melissa's gaze. When she turned to him for approval on an idea, he reddened and looked away. For one brief second their eyes met, hers firm, his uneasy. A private tension vibrated and was gone. The evening ended with thanks and polite applause. Agatha collected her things, still watching the treasurer. Something about that look troubled her, too familiar for mere parish politics. She stepped into the dusk with Mrs. Bloxby, the scent of candles still clinging to her hair. Crickets hummed in the hedges. A church bell tolled the half-hour. "Well," said Agatha, "if sanctity were measured in scented wax, we'd all be saved." Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. "Melissa means well." "So does the taxman." They reached the gate. Behind them the vicarage windows glowed. Inside, a silhouette moved, perhaps Melissa, perhaps someone else. Mrs. Bloxby's voice was soft. "I do hope Melissa knows what she's inviting into her life." Agatha glanced back. The gold light flickered once as if in answer. "So do I," she said. And with that, she strode into the night, heels clicking, unaware that the first thread of trouble in Castley had just been tugged. Monday morning in Castley arrived bright, smug, and humming with gossip. The entire village seemed united by one thrilling concern, the forthcoming village talent gala. Agatha Raisin, trudging down the lane with her shopping bag, could hear the talk rippling from garden gates to the post office. "Melissa's got the WI singing something from Les Miserables," someone called. "She's asked the butcher to do stand-up comedy," another added. Agatha rolled her eyes. "A vicar's wife with a sense of humour is a public danger," she muttered, pushing into the shop. Mrs. Bloxby, already at the counter, turned with her mild smile. "You'll feel better once you're involved, Agatha." "I am involved," said Agatha darkly, "against my will. I'm apparently in charge of publicity, which seems to mean doing all the work while Melissa collects applause." The postmistress, who never resisted a conversational skirmish, said, "I think she's marvellous. Such energy." "So has a hurricane," said Agatha. "Doesn't mean I want one in my parish." Mrs. Bloxby laughed softly. "You do like a challenge." "I like peace and gin, preferably together." But even as she spoke, Agatha felt the first flicker of curiosity about how this gala might implode. Experience had taught her that when villagers attempted harmony, scandal was usually hiding under the bunting. By midweek, the village hall looked like a cross between a charity fete and a nervous breakdown. Folding chairs squeaked, fairy lights dangled at alarming angles, and Melissa stood centre stage, clipboard in hand, radiant with leadership. "Now, everyone," she trilled, "let's keep the energy positive." The assembled performers looked as if positivity had been outlawed. Mrs. Fredericks from the bakery was rehearsing a dramatic reading of The Lady of Shalott in a voice that could curdle cream. The butcher practiced jokes about sausages that would have made a rugby team blush. Agatha took her seat at a table marked Publicity and Marketing and groaned inwardly. She had brought along a laptop and a packet of crisps, the former for work, the latter for courage. Then, with a gust of cologne and metropolitan self-importance, Roy Silver appeared. "Darling Aggie," he exclaimed, arms outstretched, "I came to save you from parochial despair." "You mean you smelled a camera?" she said. "Both can be true," said Roy, kissing the air beside her cheek. "I thought I'd modernize your posters. Think glossy minimalism with spiritual undertones. Perhaps the slogan, Casserly Gala, where talent meets grace." "How about Casserly Gala, where grace needs a drink?" He laughed. "Still the same acid tongue. I adore it." Melissa swept over, delighted. "Mr. Silver, you're the Roy Silver from London Advertising." Roy adjusted his tie modestly. "Guilty. One does what one can for the arts." Agatha noticed how quickly Melissa's hand lingered on his sleeve, her smile calibrated to admiration. Agatha's jaw tightened. "Roy's come to help with the posters," she said sharply, "and only the posters." "Naturally," said Roy, "though if you need me on stage, I've been told I have a marvellous speaking voice." "So does a foghorn," Agatha murmured. Rehearsal chaos reached its peak when a young man arrived carrying sheet music and attitude. He was tall, good-looking in a way that suggested mirrors had been kind to him. Melissa greeted him too warmly. "Everyone, this is Lawrence Fielding," she announced, "a concert pianist visiting from Oxford. He's offered to accompany our performers." Agatha watched him take Melissa's hand and hold it a fraction too long. The vicar, standing near the back, went pale. "Aren't we lucky?" Melissa continued. "Depending on the definition of lucky," said Agatha under her breath. Lawrence settled at the piano and began to play something soulful. Melissa sang, quite well, Agatha noted, though the performance was less hymn and more flirtation. When they finished, the room erupted in polite applause. "We'll make a splendid team," Melissa told him. Agatha caught the quick flicker of irritation on Reverend Paul's face. It vanished almost instantly, replaced by clerical serenity, but the damage was done. As people drifted toward tea, Agatha joined him. "She's certainly bringing life to the parish," she said carefully. "Yes," he replied, "perhaps rather too much." Agatha felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. The man looked exhausted, his collar slightly askew. "If you ever need help organizing things," she began. "Thank you, Mrs. Raisin," he interrupted gently. "But I think the less said, the better." And with that, he walked away. That evening, Agatha invited Roy and Mrs. Bloxby back to her cottage for a debriefing over wine. "She's impossible," Agatha said, "all charm and manipulation." Roy perched on the sofa, swirling his glass. "She's certainly photogenic. If she weren't married to the vicar, she could front a lifestyle brand. Holy Living by Melissa." Mrs. Bloxby frowned. "Be kind, Roy. She's only trying to contribute." "Contribute to what? Her own publicity?" said Agatha. "I tell you, she's hiding something. Women that perfect always are. Jealous, Roy teased. Suspicious, she corrected. Different thing entirely. A knock at the window interrupted them. Charles Frayth's familiar face appeared, framed by the dusk. Evening all, he said, letting himself in. Heard about this gala business. Thought I'd sponsor it. Bit of local goodwill. You, said Agatha. Since when are you philanthropic? Since the vicar's wife smiled at me, said Charles cheerfully. Agatha glared. She's married. To a vicar. Not an insurmountable obstacle, but noted. Mrs. Bloxby coughed delicately. Perhaps your contribution could go toward the lighting fund. Happy to oblige, said Charles. Always enjoyed shining a light on virtue. Agatha decided, not for the first time, that men were hopeless. The following afternoon she returned to the hall to collect her publicity notes. Through the half-open door she heard voices, sharp, urgent. Melissa and Lawrence were arguing. You promised, he said. Lower your voice, Melissa hissed. You'll ruin everything. I'm tired of secrets. Either you tell him or I will. There was the scrape of a chair. Agatha peered in just in time to see Melissa rise, colour high in her cheeks. You'll regret this, she said in a low, trembling voice, and swept out. Lawrence slammed the piano lid, muttering an oath. Agatha withdrew silently. Her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the familiar excitement of something juicy beginning to ferment. She walked home under the fading light, thoughts whirring. What could the pianist possibly have over Melissa? An affair seemed too obvious. Perhaps money, or worse, reputation. The trouble with saints, she murmured, is that someone always knows the sinner underneath. That night, restless curiosity drove her back toward the vicarage under pretence of dropping off poster drafts. The village was quiet, the air scented with damp earth. Light spilled from the drawing-room windows. Through the hedge she saw Melissa moving briskly about, alone. Agatha was about to leave when she noticed the woman pause, glance toward the door, and slip a sealed envelope from the desk into her handbag with deliberate care. She looked around as though fearing witnesses, then extinguished the lamp. Agatha's breath fogged in the cool air. Her instincts sharpened like claws. Whatever you're hiding, my dear, she whispered, I'll find it. She turned for home, heels clicking against the pavement, the night closing behind her like a stage curtain. The next morning broke sharp and bright, as though the weather had decided to pretend nothing had happened. A sudden cold snap had left a thin frost silvering the edges of Agatha's garden, and a thin curl of chimney smoke promised warmth she didn't feel. She stood at her window, stirring her tea with unnecessary force, staring at the small notice already pinned in the shop window. Police called to the vicarage, village shaken. Honestly, she muttered, Carsley can't even manage grief without turning it into a headline. She's beside something, said Agatha darkly. I've never trusted people who dab perfume over their grief. Mrs. Bloxby smiled faintly. Curiosity isn't the same as compassion, Agatha. Compassion's overrated when people are lying. You think she is? I think she's too polished. Women like Melissa and Strother don't crumble. They calculate. Mrs. Bloxby folded her hands, serene as ever. Even so, perhaps it's best not to stir things unnecessarily. Agatha eyed her friend affectionately. If I didn't stir things, this village would congeal. By midday, Carsley was humming with speculation. In the shop queue, two women whispered that Melissa and Strother had been arguing with someone late the night before. At the post office, someone else claimed he'd absconded to Mallorca. Each version grew more elaborate by the hour, embroidered with infidelity and foreign bank accounts. If gossip were horsepower, said Agatha, locking her cottage door, this village could pull the Orient Express. She headed to the Red Lion, the social furnace where rumours were forged into conviction. The low-beamed room smelled of ale and damp wool, packed with villagers nursing the thrill of scandal. Trevor Mott, the self-styled railway historian, sat by the bar with a pint and a captive audience. His thin moustache bristled with authority. I told Brant the Society's signal lamps were worth thousands, he was saying. And what does he do? Tries to flog them to a private collector in Cheltenham. Said it was for restoration funds, but I know a scheme when I see one. You've got proof? Someone asked. Proof? Proof's for the unimaginative, said Trevor, sipping with satisfaction. Agatha slid onto the stool beside him. Funny, she said. I thought you were his friend. He jumped slightly. Mrs. Raisin? Didn't see you there. You didn't see a lot of things, apparently. Like who hit Clive over the head, if that's what happened? A murmur rippled around the bar. Trevor flushed. I never said he was dead. Not yet, said Agatha, but you're rehearsing nicely. Laughter flickered, quickly stifled as Bill Wong's shadow crossed the doorway. The constable at his side ordered tea. Bill ordered patience. Agatha, he said mildly, I'd appreciate it if you refrained from conducting public inquests. I'm just collecting observations, she said, from the bottom of a pint glass. Sometimes that's where the truth hides. Before Bill could reply, the pub door swung open again. A gust of perfume and London confidence swept in. Roy Silver. Darling, he cried, spotting Agatha. You look divine in local tragedy. I'm here on assignment. You're here for attention, said Agatha. Roy brushed an imaginary speck from his tailored sleeve. Both can be true. I'm managing PR for the Historical Society's crisis. Lydia begged me to craft a narrative of resilience. I may need your quote for the press release. Something gritty yet redemptive. Try shove off, short and redemptive. Roy pouted, unoffended. Honestly, Aggie, you should thank me. Every mystery needs a glamorous witness. You're practically the Cotswold Miss Marple. If you call me that again, I'll commit an actual murder. Bill's lips twitched. Do carry on, he said, retreating to a corner table. Agatha ignored him, focusing instead on a new voice from the next booth. A woman she didn't recognize, elegant, early 30s, silk scarf and real pearls, was speaking to the barman. I only met Mr. Brant once, she said in an accent that placed her firmly in the estate agent class. He showed me a parcel of land behind the old goods yard, said it was a quiet opportunity, whatever that means. He hinted it might soon be for sale, though strictly off record, of course. Agatha pricked up her ears. Off record, she repeated, turning. The woman blinked. Oh, Saskia Dunn, property management. You must be Mrs. Raisin. I read your name in the paper. Terribly exciting. Well, awful, obviously, but exciting. Do go on, said Agatha. What sort of land? About 2 acres, unregistered. Apparently part of the old railway allotment, but it's not on the deeds. Someone powerful wanted it handled quietly. Powerful, Agatha echoed. He didn't say who, just hinted it could change the face of the village. I thought it sounded rather sinister. But then, most rural developments are. Agatha's pulse quickened. Greed, not romance, that was the motive that stuck. Land, money, self-importance, it fit perfectly. Charles, who had materialized at her elbow with his usual impeccable timing, murmured, Careful, darling, that gleam in your eye is visible from space. Don't be ridiculous, I'm merely deducing. You're deducing with the enthusiasm of a terrier near a rabbit hole. Agatha ignored him, addressing Saskia. And you never heard from Brant again? No, I assumed the sale fell through. Such a pity. Quaint place, full of potential. For what? A luxury housing estate? Saskia's smile was professional. Something like that. Bill, overhearing, approached again. Mrs. Raisin, if you've finished interviewing witnesses, I need a word. He drew her aside. Leave Saskia Dunn alone. We've already spoken to her. And she's legitimate. No criminal record, no connection to Brant beyond business. That's what she told you, said Agatha. Yes, said Bill patiently. That's why we asked. She gave him a bright smile. You're such a dear boy, Bill, always trusting the paperwork. But villains don't fill out forms. He sighed. Just don't interfere. Interfere? I'm offering moral support. You're offering chaos, he said, walking off. As dusk settled, the pub thinned. Roy was regaling a group of pensioners with tales of London journalism. Charles was chatting up Saskia under the guise of research. Agatha finished her second sherry, pondering everything she'd heard, the lamps, the land, the lies. If Clive Brant had planned to sell railway antiques and secret property, someone had plenty to lose, or gain. On her way out, she caught Trevor muttering to another regular. She thinks she's Poirot, that one. Knows in everything. Agatha turned sweetly. Yes, and if I were Poirot, you'd already be in handcuffs. The laughter that followed was genuine, if nervous. Outside, the air had turned raw. She walked home through puddled lanes, the moon slicing through scudding clouds. Behind her, the Red Lion's windows glowed like gossip in physical form, warm, bright, and full of smoke. Back at her cottage, she locked the door, switched off the lamps, and stood a moment by the window. The village lay hushed except for the occasional car or the bark of a distant dog. Then she saw it. A faint flicker of light at the far edge of the field, beyond the hedgerow, the old signal house, a lantern moving slowly inside. Agatha's breath caught. The police had sealed that place. No one should be there. For a long moment she watched the glow waver, vanish, then return, like someone pacing. "Bill won't believe me," she murmured. "Charles will think I'm imagining things. Which means—" She reached for her coat, heart already thudding with the reckless pleasure of disobedience. Outside, the night swallowed her shape as she started down the lane toward Mirabelle Crossing, the air damp and expectant, as though the countryside itself were holding its breath. Morning rain drizzled over Carsley, turning its honey-coloured stone cottages into something more reflective and uncertain. Agatha Raisin stood at her window, watching the drops crawl down the glass. The village that had buzzed yesterday now felt hushed, as though it too mourned or speculated. In Carsley, the two were nearly the same thing. 2 days later, Carsley woke to the news no one had expected, but everyone would dissect. Melissa and Strother had been found dead at the vicarage. Agatha disliked the idea of comforting clergymen, but curiosity was stronger than sympathy, and curiosity was her dominant sin. She put on her best raincoat, the one that whispered competence, and set off through the drizzle. The vicarage looked smaller than before, its roses drooping from yesterday's tragedy. A police car was parked discreetly nearby. Agatha took a breath and rang the bell. The maid, a girl of perhaps 20, opened the door with eyes red from weeping. "You're Mrs. Raisin, aren't you? He's in the study." Inside, the air smelled of damp wool and lilies. Reverend Paul sat by the window, hands clasped around an untouched mug of tea. His black suit hung loosely, and grief had bleached the warmth from his face. "Reverend," said Agatha gently in a tone that surprised even herself, "I came to say how sorry I am. She, Melissa, did a lot for the village." He looked up with a faint, automatic smile. "Yes, too much, perhaps." "If there's anything I can do—" "Thank you," he said, staring past her. "The police assure me it was accidental. They're mistaken, of course, but perhaps it's better that way." Agatha's pulse quickened. "Better?" He hesitated. She hadn't been herself. The pressure, the attention, it was difficult. "You mean the gala?" "Among other things." He set the cup down, the clink unnaturally loud. "Forgive me, I've parish matters to attend." Dismissed. Agatha recognized the tone. She rose, feigning mildness. "Of course, I won't keep you." But as she turned, she noticed a faint ring on the desk. Another cup had stood there recently. The scent of coffee, not tea, lingered. In the kitchen, Agatha found the maid wiping her eyes with a dish rag. Sympathy was not her natural language, but she managed, "Hard time for you, I expect." The girl nodded. She was kind, mostly. Gave me her old clothes, even that blue scarf she liked. "Mostly?" A guilty pause. Lately she was frightened. Said someone was threatening to ruin everything, but she wouldn't say who. Agatha leaned closer. "Did she get any strange letters? Calls?" "There was an envelope last week. Thick paper, no name. She burned it straight away." "Burned it?" Said it was nonsense. A car horn outside made the girl jump. Agatha laid a hand on her arm. "If you remember anything else, you'll tell me, won't you?" "They said not to talk to anyone." "They meant reporters. I'm a neighbour," said Agatha, deploying her best reassuring smile. "And neighbours help each other, particularly in murder cases." The girl's eyes widened. "But they said—" "Yes, yes, accidental death. I've heard that fairy tale before." Back at her cottage, Agatha found Mrs. Bloxby waiting with 2 cups of tea and an expression of gentle concern. "I thought you might need company," said the vicar's wife. "What I need is a gin and tonic," said Agatha, removing her coat. "But tea will do until decency allows." They settled at the table. Outside, rain ticked against the panes like patient curiosity. "I went to see the vicar," said Agatha. "He's a man trying to believe his wife was perfect while knowing she wasn't. That's a difficult balancing act." Mrs. Bloxby sighed. "Melissa came to me last week, before the committee meeting. She seemed burdened." "Burdened how?" "As though she wanted to confess something but couldn't. She said she feared she might be found out. Then she changed the subject to flower arrangements." Agatha's eyes sharpened. "Found out? About what?" "She didn't say, but she spoke of temptations of vanity. I assumed she meant the gala. It may have been something more serious. Or someone, murmured Agatha. Mrs. Bloxby gave her a mild, warning look. Be careful, the vicar's already suffering. And Melissa's already dead. I'd call that suffering enough. Bill Wong dropped by later, bearing supermarket pastries and the weary patience of a man expecting trouble. You've been to the vicarage, he said, sitting down uninvited. Naturally. Naturally, he echoed. And interrogated the staff? Chatted, said Agatha. The maid said Melissa was frightened of someone. That doesn't sound like a woman planning a cheerful tea in the garden. Agatha. Don't Agatha me, Bill. I know you think I meddle, but this is no accident. The woman was scared. There's a difference between paranoia and intuition, and Melissa had the latter. Bill broke a pastry in half. You've got no proof. Not yet, she said, smiling, but give me an afternoon. He sighed. Do not, under any circumstances, start interviewing people. Of course not, she said sweetly. You promise? On my honour. Bill looked at her with long, knowing silence. That's precisely what worries me. By late afternoon, the rain had cleared, leaving the air sharp and clean. Agatha wandered down the lane, ostensibly to post a letter, but really to collect intelligence. At the corner, she met Doris Simpson, who knew more about village secrets than the internet. Terrible business, Doris said. They say the poor vicar's not eating. Grief does that, said Agatha. And guilt, Doris lowered her voice. You know she'd been meeting someone at the church after hours. Agatha's heart gave a small leap. Who? Didn't see, but there were lights on well past 10. My nephew walks the dog that way. Said he heard voices, arguing. Men's or women's? One of each. Could have been the vicar and Melissa. Could have, said Doris, her tone implying it wasn't. But my nephew swears he heard her say, You'll destroy me. Agatha's mind whirred. If Melissa had been blackmailed, it would explain the fear and the secrecy. Thank you, Doris. You've been extremely helpful. You'll tell me what you find? In due course, said Agatha, which in Carsley meant never. Evening brought one of those deceptive calms that make country lanes look innocent again. Agatha lit the fire and poured herself a generous brandy. Her mind replayed the day like a puzzle with missing edges. Melissa afraid of exposure, a burned letter, a secret meeting, and a husband too willing to believe in accident. She was reaching for her notebook when Charles Fraith strolled in without knocking. You should wear a bell, she snapped, and deprive you of your daily shock. Never. What do you want? To see if you're still alive. You have that look that says fresh murder, must investigate. Thought I'd bring biscuits before you starve in the pursuit of justice. Kind of you, said Agatha, softening despite herself. So, what's the theory? Blackmail, she said, or guilt, possibly both. Delicious combination. He poured himself brandy. And the suspects? Half the village, said Agatha, starting with whoever she feared. Which would include you, darling, if charm were a weapon. Go home, Charles, he grinned. You'd miss me. She didn't answer. Later, as the fire crackled low, Agatha's eye fell on a cardboard box in the corner, the donations she'd collected for the church jumble sale. She bent to check the contents: chipped teapots, paperback romances, a hideous porcelain cat. Then, half buried beneath a pile of scarves, she noticed a small leather notebook tied with a ribbon. She drew it out slowly. The initials M.A. were embossed in fading gold. Her breath caught. Melissa Anstruther. Agatha turned it over. Inside, the first page was dated 3 weeks before the murder. The handwriting neat, precise, faintly anxious. If he ever tells, I'm finished. Agatha stared at the words as the clock ticked softly behind her. Well, Melissa, she murmured, you've told me now. Outside, the rain began again, soft, persistent, promising more secrets to wash to the surface. Morning arrived with one of those pale, watery suns that promised optimism it had no intention of keeping. Agatha Raisin sat at her kitchen table, the newly discovered diary open before her like contraband. It smelled faintly of lavender and guilt. She had fortified herself with coffee, black, strong, and morally questionable at 10 in the morning, and was poised with a pen as though taking dictation from the dead. The first pages were dull enough. Melissa Anstruther chronicling village meetings, charitable endeavours, and the price of organic honey. But halfway through, the tone changed. I feel him watching me again. I told him it's over, but he smiles as if I've promised him something. Paul must never know. Agatha's brows rose. Well, well, she murmured. Our saint had secrets after all. The next entry was angrier. He said I owe him, that if he tells, I'm finished. Agatha tapped her pen against her teeth. He? Who was he? Lawrence the pianist seemed an obvious candidate, young, vain, and fond of melodrama. But Charles Frayth had been fluttering round Melissa like a moth around a lamp. She would hardly be the first married woman dazzled by his lazy charm. "Oh, Charles," she muttered, "you'd flirt with a weather vane if it looked your way." The phone rang. She snatched it up. "Aggie!" Roy Silver's voice, bright and exasperating as sunlight on tin. "Just saw the headline. Tragedy at the vicarage. You're in it again, aren't you?" "Only as an observer," she said. "You mean detective? Don't deny it. You can't resist corpses any more than I can resist camera time. Now listen. Someone told me at the London office that the vicar had insurance on his wife. Imagine, a church policy or something." "Rubbish," said Agatha, though her heart gave an interested thump. "Where did you hear that?" "One of our PR clients handles financial portfolios. Said Melissa took one out last spring. Joint life cover, very generous. Perhaps dear Paul's morning with a calculator." "Roy!" "Just keeping the story alive, darling. London loves a scandal with a moral veneer. Shall I call the Mail?" "You'll call the morgue if you don't stop stirring," she snapped and hung up. Still, as she poured another coffee, the notion clung like smoke. Insurance. If true, it added a motive sharp enough to slice through grief. Later that morning, she met Bill Wong in the high street, raincoat collar up against the breeze. "Morning, Mrs. Raisin. You look pleased with yourself. Found another suspect?" "Don't tease, Bill. I found Melissa's diary." His eyebrows shot up. "You what?" "In the jumble sale box. She must have hidden it among the donations." "You realize you're tampering with evidence. Don't be so priggish. I'm rescuing it from destruction." "You should hand it over." "In good time, after I've read it properly." He sighed, long-suffering. "What's in it?" "Hints of an affair, or blackmail, possibly both. If he tells, I'm finished," she wrote. Could refer to anything, a secret debt, a scandal, even parish gossip. "Don't try to sound sensible, it doesn't suit you." Bill's mouth twitched. "And which poor man are you accusing this time?" "Lawrence Fielding seems the obvious choice, but Charles has been suspiciously eager to help the investigation." "You mean he's been helping you?" said Bill. "There's a difference." Agatha ignored him. "You'll check whether the vicar had insurance. If you promise to stay out of trouble." "Promises," said Agatha, "are for dull people." By afternoon, her restlessness had outgrown the cottage. She set off towards the churchyard, diary tucked in her handbag. The village air smelled of cut grass and curiosity. People stared as she passed. Sympathy and suspicion shared equal billing. Mrs. Bloxby emerged from the church porch with a clipboard. "Agatha, my dear, you look purposeful. Is this another investigation?" "A pastoral visit," said Agatha, straight-faced. "To the dead?" "To their reputation, Melissa's specifically." Mrs. Bloxby gave a gentle sigh. "You won't find peace in that diary." "No, but I might find a murderer." The vicar's wife hesitated. "Be careful. Secrets sometimes protect the living more than they condemn the dead." Agatha softened. "I know, but I can't abide puzzles unsolved, or saints untested." She left Mrs. Bloxby to her paperwork and crossed the road to the shop. Inside, Doris Simpson was leaning on the counter, mid-gossip. "Of course," I said to her, "you can't mix foxglove with mint and call it a tisane." But she wouldn't listen. Agatha froze. Foxglove. The herb grows wild behind the vicarage. Deadly stuff if you brew it wrong. Why, my cousin's neighbour's cat once. But Agatha was already half out the door. That evening Charles appeared at her cottage unannounced, bearing a bottle of Chablis and his usual smug grin. "Heard you've been reading the late Mrs. Anstruther's private thoughts," he said. "You hear too much," said Agatha. "It's a gift. So, was she secretly in love with me?" "You flatter yourself." "Everyone does," he said, cheerfully pouring the wine. "You really think the pianist might have killed her?" "I think she was afraid of a man who had something on her." "And you assume it wasn't me?" Agatha eyed him. "Should it be?" "Darling, if I murdered every woman who fancied me, you'd never get through the queue at the police station." She couldn't help laughing. For a moment, warmth softened the edges of her cynicism. Then she caught sight of the diary on the mantelpiece and sobered. Charles, did Melissa ever mention a debt? Financial? Or moral? He thought. Only that she was raising money for that ridiculous roof. Why? Because she wrote a terrible debt to be repaid. Could mean anything. Guilt, blackmail, unpaid bills. Or hush money, said Agatha quietly. Charles leaned back, studying her. You do realize, my dear, that you sound rather like Poirot after his third sherry. And you sound like a man who doesn't want me to find out the truth. On the contrary, he said, smiling lazily, I want you to, if only to see the look on Bill Wong's face when you beat him to it. When Charles finally left, Agatha sat by the fire, rereading the diary's last entries. Melissa's tone had become desperate. He came again, said the truth always finds its way. I can't let Paul suffer for my mistakes. There must be a way to silence him. Agatha felt a prickle of pity. Melissa had lived in terror, trying to maintain her perfect facade while some shadow hung over her. Perhaps she hadn't been murdered at all. Perhaps she'd brewed the poison herself, intending to frighten, not die. Then she shook her head. No, she wasn't the type. Saints like Melissa expect miracles, not accidents. The phone rang, jolting her thoughts. She grabbed it. Bill? Yes, you'll be pleased. The lab results just came through. Tell me. Melissa's tea contained concentrated foxglove extract. Not traces, lethal dosage. And guess where it grows? Don't tell me, said Agatha, heart quickening. Right outside the vicarage kitchen door. Anyone could have picked it. So not an accident, then? Still could be, said Bill. Foxglove can look like sage if you're careless. And if you're homicidal? Then it's convenient, he admitted. The second cup didn't show anything obvious on the first test, but I've asked the lab to run deeper checks. Agatha leaned back, mind racing. 2 cups, 1 death, and a killer tidy enough to wash up after tea. Thanks, Bill, she said slowly. Try not to gloat, he warned. You'll be insufferable. Too late. She hung up, staring into the fire. Foxglove by the kitchen door, a husband too calm, a diary full of threats, and a village steeped in secrets. Agatha smiled grimly. If he tells, I'm finished, she quoted aloud. Well, my dear Melissa, someone did, and I intend to find out who. Outside, wind stirred the hedgerows, carrying with it the faint rustle of foxglove leaves, soft, poisonous applause. The following morning dawned damp and deceitful, one of those Cotswold days that promised sunshine and delivered mildew. Agatha Raisin pulled on her gardening gloves, a rain hat, and her air of moral purpose. If the police won't find the truth, she told her reflection, then it's up to me. Someone in this village poisoned that woman, and it wasn't the foxglove's fault. She marched up to the vicarage, where dew clung to the grass like guilt. The police tape had been removed, leaving the garden strangely unguarded, as though tragedy had been tidied away. The vicarage roses drooped in the drizzle, their petals soft and overblown. Near the compost heap, Agatha stopped. Something white glimmered among the vegetable peelings. She knelt, not easily, and drew out a half-burned scrap of paper, its edges curling inward. The words, in careful masculine handwriting, read, "Meet me after the rehearsal. No more threats." "Oh, delicious," whispered Agatha. "Now we're getting somewhere." She was still studying the note when the sound of a cough made her jump. The gardener stood nearby, cap in hand, mud on his boots, expression surly. "Can I help you, Mrs. Raisin?" "Just admiring the hydrangeas," she said, tucking the note discreetly into her pocket. "Funny place to admire them from, that compost heap." Agatha straightened, brushing soil from her knees. "I'm assisting the investigation." "Didn't know they'd deputized you," he said dryly. "Unofficially," she replied. "I understand you were close to Mrs. Anstruther." He scowled. "Close to her temper, maybe. She still owed me for the trellis I built. Said the church fund was short, but she'd pay me after the gala. Now I suppose I'll never see the money." "Did you argue about it?" "Everyone argued with her sooner or later," he said. "Didn't mean we wanted her dead." "No one said you did," said Agatha quickly, which in her experience was the best way to make someone wonder if they had. The man glanced at her gloved hands. "You'll find nothing but worms down there. Best leave the digging to me." "Oh, I've made a career of digging," said Agatha. By lunchtime the drizzle had thickened into a dismal drizzle plus. Agatha took refuge in the vicarage kitchen, pretending to warm her hands by the kettle while her eyes roved for clues. The room was painfully neat, not a cup out of place, not a crumb daring to linger. She turned toward the window. Beyond it, the patch of foxgloves waved innocently in the wet breeze. "Poison and perfection always go together," she muttered. The maid entered, startled to find her there. "Oh, I thought everyone had gone." "Just me," said Agatha, doing a little reflective thinking. The girl frowned. "You shouldn't be here. Reverend Paul's resting." "Resting or hiding?" The maid's eyes flickered toward the study door. "He's been praying all morning, said he's lost his faith." "He'll find it again once the press leaves," said Agatha briskly. "Thank you, my dear." She slipped out before the girl could ask further questions. Back home, she laid the note flat on her kitchen table and studied it through a magnifying glass she'd once bought for inspecting wine labels. The handwriting was neat, almost clerical, the sort of hand that wrote sermons and committee minutes. She fetched an old copy of the parish newsletter. The vicar's signature on the front matched, not perfectly, but close enough to prickle her instincts. "So, Reverend Paul," she murmured, "who were you threatening or being threatened by?" Before she could speculate further, the doorbell rang. Charles Fraith entered, holding a paper bag and wearing the expression of a man about to commit mischief. "I come bearing lunch," he announced, "and disapproval, both cold." "You're late," said Agatha. "I had to park 3 streets away. The Women's Guild are loitering outside your gate, sharpening their knitting needles." "What?" "Something about respect for the dead. Apparently you've been turning the vicarage into a detective playground." Agatha groaned. "Can't a woman search a compost heap in peace?" "Not in Carsley, darling. You've set the entire village grapevine buzzing. Oh, for heaven's sake." He unpacked sandwiches and poured wine into mugs. "Eat. You'll need strength to survive the lynching." "It's not lynching," she said, but there was a knock on the door before she could continue. Outside stood 4 formidable members of the Women's Guild, armed with umbrellas and moral outrage. Their spokeswoman, Mrs. Huntley, spoke in the tone of one addressing a recalcitrant pupil. "Mrs. Raisin, we feel obliged to express our disappointment. Poking about in holy soil, interrogating staff, it's indecent." "Indecent is murdering the vicar's wife," retorted Agatha. "That's for the police to determine, not you. You're turning tragedy into theatre." Charles leaned against the doorframe, smiling. "She does like applause." "Not helping," hissed Agatha. Mrs. Huntley's eyes narrowed. "We insist you stop interfering. The village needs healing, not scandal." "The village always needs scandal," said Agatha, "or it starts inventing its own." The guild ladies gasped as if she'd blasphemed. Charles stepped smoothly between them. "Ladies, if you'll allow me, Mrs. Raisin has been under tremendous strain. Perhaps a cup of tea would soothe nerves all round." "Tea won't change her behaviour," snapped Mrs. Huntley. "No," said Agatha sweetly, "but gin might." The door shut on a collective sniff. Charles turned to her, amused. "You really do have a gift for diplomacy." "They'll thank me when I solve it," she said. "Or when you move away," he said. Later that afternoon, Agatha returned to the vicarage grounds under the pretext of returning the church key. The gardener was gone. The rain had stopped, leaving the garden slick and silent. She knelt near the compost heap again, searching for any other remnants of paper. Instead, her boots slipped on the damp earth, and she tumbled headfirst into the heap with an undignified squelch. For a long moment she lay there, stunned, half-buried in vegetable refuse. "Wonderful," she muttered. "I survived London PR only to die in compost." A familiar voice drawled behind her. "I'd offer you a hand, but I'm afraid you'd pull me in." Charles, of course. He extended an arm anyway, grinning. "Stop smirking and pull," she snapped. He did, hauling her upright. She was streaked with mud and righteous indignation. "Oh, lovely," he said. "The rustic look suits you. Sort of Lady Macbeth meets allotment." "One word more and I'll brain you with a marrow," said Agatha. He laughed, brushing a leaf from her hat. "Honestly, Aggie, why not leave the sleuthing to the professionals?" "Because the professionals are blind. I found a note, half burned in the compost." "A note?" She showed him the scrap. His eyebrows rose. "Handwriting looks like the vicar's." "Exactly," she said. "And Bill says it can't be. He thinks I'm seeing conspiracies." "You usually are," said Charles mildly. "But what if Melissa was meeting her husband? What if they quarrelled, and it turned deadly?" Charles frowned. "You think the vicar poisoned her?" He had opportunity, and possibly motive. She was afraid of someone. Maybe she meant him. Or maybe she meant you, said Charles cheerfully. You do terrify people. By early evening, the events of the day had become village folklore. Agatha returned home exhausted, smelling faintly of compost and defeat. She made herself a drink, turned on the radio, and tried to ignore the headlines. The village gossip mill was faster than the BBC. Her doorbell rang again. Bill Wong stood outside, hands in pockets, looking half amused, half reproachful. "Fallen into anything interesting lately?" he asked. "If you mean the compost heap, it was strictly in the line of duty." "You're a menace," he said, though his tone softened. "The gardener complained you were trespassing." "He's lying. I was investigating." "Same thing, legally speaking," she sighed. "Bill, I found a note, burned, in his handwriting, I think." He followed her inside as she produced the scrap. He studied it under the lamp. Could be his writing, or could be anyone's with tidy penmanship, and the message could mean anything. "It means motive," she said. "It means speculation," he countered. "You need evidence." "That's what I'm collecting." "By falling into compost?" "You're enjoying this far too much," said Agatha. "Only a little," said Bill, smiling. "Look, I'll have the handwriting checked properly. But for now, promise me, no more trespassing, no more rummaging." "Fine," she said stiffly. "You don't mean that," he said. "No," she admitted. That night, rain returned, tapping the windows like impatient fingers. Agatha changed into her dressing gown, poured another brandy, and sat by the fire with her thoughts. She was tired but restless. Every clue seemed to contradict the last. The vicar, the gardener, even that slippery pianist, all had motives tangled in village respectability. She wondered briefly what it would be like to live a simple life. No corpses, no compost, no moral ambiguity. Then she smiled ruefully. Simplicity was for other people. She was halfway through her drink when she heard a faint sound at the front door, a soft rustle, then the squeak of metal. She froze. After a moment's hesitation, she went to the hallway. An envelope lay on the doormat. No stamp, no handwriting, just a folded sheet inside. She opened it. "Leave the dead in peace." The words were typed, precise, almost polite. Agatha stared at them, her pulse quickening. Outside, the wind hissed through the hedges and the foxgloves shivered in the dark. "Well," she said aloud, her voice steady despite the chill in her stomach. "Now I know I'm on the right track." She lifted her glass in a mock toast toward the window. "To whoever sent that, thank you. You've just confirmed there's something worth finding." And as she turned out the light, she couldn't help the small, fierce smile that crept across her face, because in Carsley, nothing thrilled Agatha Raisin more than being told to mind her own business. Sunday dawned with deceptive calm, a day made for repentance or hypocrisy, depending on one's nature. In Carsley, both were popular options. Agatha Raisin stood before her mirror, inspecting herself critically. She had chosen a conservative navy dress, a pearl necklace, and a hat that suggested both respectability and readiness for cross-examination. She did not intend to confess anything, but she meant to look as if she might elicit confessions from others. By the time she reached the church, the bells were already calling the faithful, or at least the curious. The pews were full. Grief, scandal, and speculation had swelled attendance far beyond spiritual duty. Reverend Paul Anstruther stood at the pulpit, pale and strained, his hands gripping the sides as if steadying himself against a tide. His sermon began quietly, a tremor beneath each word. "Forgiveness," he said, "is the hardest grace to offer, especially when what we must forgive lies within ourselves." A ripple of discomfort moved through the congregation. Even Mrs. Josephs, who normally smiled at sermons like a child at pudding, looked uneasy. Agatha, watching closely, saw that the vicar's knuckles were white. He looked not merely sorrowful but frightened. Each pause between his words seemed to hold something unsaid. "When we conceal our sins," he went on, "they poison us. When we confess them, we begin to heal. Yet confession," he faltered, "requires courage, and faith that mercy exists." Agatha leaned toward Mrs. Bloxby. "If that's not a man being blackmailed, I'll eat my hat." "Lower your voice," murmured Mrs. Bloxby, though her eyes were troubled. The vicar concluded with a trembling benediction, then sank briefly to his knees before composing himself. When he rose, Agatha caught the faintest tremor in his hands as he closed the Bible. After the service, the churchyard filled with murmuring voices disguised as condolences. Agatha, prowling among them like a terrier among pigeons, caught fragments. Never the same since she arrived, poor man. Too much pressure on him, I always said. He looks half dead himself. Mrs. Blocksby appeared at her elbow, quiet as ever. Agatha, if you can promise not to start an inquest right here, there's something you ought to know. When have I ever? Began Agatha. Promise, said Mrs. Blocksby, firmly. Agatha sighed. Fine. I promise not to interrogate anyone in the presence of a gravestone. Mrs. Blocksby nodded. Melissa had a connection with a man who works in the church charity shop. His name is Alan Trent. He's an ex-convict. I didn't know until recently. Melissa insisted on employing him. She told me he deserved a chance. An admirable sentiment, said Agatha dryly, unless he repaid it by murdering her. Mrs. Blocksby's expression tightened. I don't think so, but she'd been giving him money, regularly. Hush money? She said it was to help him get on his feet, but last week she told me she feared someone would expose her. For what, she didn't say. She was pale, almost shaking. Agatha frowned. And you didn't think to tell anyone? I thought it was exhaustion. We were preparing for the gala, and she was busy perfecting her own sainthood, finished Agatha. Mrs. Blocksby sighed. You're unkind when you're right. That afternoon, Agatha drove to the charity shop in nearby Mercester. The bell over the door jangled accusingly as she entered. The air smelled of musty cardigans and good intentions. Behind the counter stood a man of about 40, tall and narrow-shouldered, with thinning hair and a nervous smile. Alan Trent? She asked. Yes, ma'am. How can I help? I'm a friend of Mrs. Anstruther. The smile faltered. Was. Quite. I wanted to ask you about her work here. He looked wary. I've already spoken to the police. I'm not the police. Think of me as a... She hesitated. Concerned neighbour. He studied her a moment, then said quietly, She was kind to me. Most people aren't. I did some stupid things when I was younger. Fraud, small stuff. She gave me a chance to start over. And money? He flinched. That wasn't... She insisted. Said it was for a clean slate. I didn't ask questions. You didn't threaten her? His head snapped up. No, I'd never hurt her. She was... He looked away, swallowing hard. She was frightened of something, but not of me. She said she'd done wrong, and it was catching up to her. Did she say what kind of wrong? He shook his head. Only that she wished she could tell her husband, but it would destroy him. Agatha regarded him closely. There was sincerity in his discomfort. Liars usually met her eyes too easily. You didn't see her the day she died? No. She rang that morning, said she couldn't make it in, sounded distracted. Thank you, said Agatha. If you remember anything else. I won't talk to the press, he said quickly. Good. I loathe them myself. She left him blinking behind the counter and stepped into the afternoon drizzle. Bill Wong was waiting by her cottage when she returned, leaning against his car with the patience of a man who'd been stood up by sense. Where have you been? Interviewing a criminal, said Agatha, hanging up her coat. Legally. You mean Alan Trent? We already spoke to him. He's clean. So were the foxgloves until Melissa boiled them, said Agatha. He's got an alibi and was at the shop all morning. 3 witnesses confirm it. Then perhaps he has an accomplice. Did you know Melissa was paying him? Bill frowned. Yes. He said it was charity. She called it a clean slate. Sounds like blackmail to me. You always think it's blackmail. That's because it usually is. He rubbed his forehead. We checked her accounts. Small transfers every month, nothing suspicious. She was generous, that's all. Oh, Bill, you're too trusting. A woman terrified of being exposed doesn't donate out of pure virtue. Maybe she felt guilty for something else, you know, her own vanity, pride, whatever. Not everything's criminal. Agatha gave him a skeptical look. In Carsley, everything's personal, and that's worse. Later, she called Mrs. Blocksby to report her findings. The man's harmless, Agatha said. Soft-spoken, polite, possibly allergic to daylight, but Melissa was terrified, and it wasn't him. Mrs. Blocksby's voice was thoughtful. Then she must have been protecting someone else. Her husband? I doubt it. Paul's too honest to hide a lie that long. That's what makes him dangerous, said Agatha. Honest men snap eventually. Agatha, don't worry. I'm not accusing the clergy yet. Mrs. Blocksby laughed softly. You do realize Bill will throttle you if you keep meddling. He'll have to catch me first, said Agatha. That evening, unable to rest, She returned to the church. It was nearly dark, the air sharp with the scent of damp stone and candle wax. The door stood unlocked, a habit Mrs. Blocksby had never managed to cure. Agatha slipped inside. The nave was silent except for the faint ticking of the old brass clock. She moved toward the vestry, guided by the thin beam of her torch. The vicarage office was neat as ever. Papers stacked, ledgers aligned, dust motes floating like lazy confessions in the lamplight. She felt an absurd flicker of guilt, as if God himself were watching her rummage through his paperwork. "Sorry, Lord," she muttered. "Just checking your accounts." She opened the church ledger, the same one Melissa had been so devoted to. The last entries were routine, donations, expenses, petty cash. But near the back, a page had been neatly torn out, not ripped in haste but removed with precision, as though someone had wanted it to vanish without offence. The missing page number matched the date of the gala planning fund, the event Melissa had organised. Agatha's pulse quickened. She turned the ledger sideways, inspecting the edge. A faint indentation showed where a signature had once been written, a long name beginning with M. Melissa's. "You were covering something up, weren't you?" she whispered, and someone made sure the evidence disappeared. A sound behind her made her whirl. The door creaked slightly, but no one entered. Only the candle flames shivered. Agatha smiled to herself, half uneasy, half exhilarated. She was getting close. Back home, she poured a glass of wine and sat before the fire, mulling over what she'd found. The diary, the half-burned note, the missing ledger page, all threads from the same tangle. Melissa had been paying a man with a criminal record, hiding a financial irregularity, and meeting someone secretly after the rehearsal. And yet everyone described her as kind, saintly, faultless. "People always praise the dead for qualities they never liked while they were alive," Agatha said aloud. Charles's voice, amused, echoed in her mind. "Halos are magnets for dust." She smiled despite herself. Then her expression sobered. Melissa's perfection had been armour. But against what? The fire crackled, throwing restless shadows against the walls. Agatha felt the first real chill of unease. There was something bigger than jealousy or money behind this. Something moral, perhaps, or simply human folly twisted too far. She finished her wine, stood and looked out the window. The church tower rose dark against the sky, one light burning faintly in the vestry. "Keep trembling, Reverend," she murmured. "I'll find what you're afraid of." Then, with the satisfaction only purpose can bring, she turned off the lamp and climbed the stairs, leaving the ledger open on the table, the torn edge fluttering faintly in the draught. Agatha Raisin's morning began with the sound of triumph and disaster arriving together, both contained in Roy Silver's voice. "Aggie, darling," he cried from the garden gate, his tone suggesting he had single-handedly solved the murder, rebranded the parish, and sold the film rights. Agatha, still in her dressing gown, flung open the door. "Roy, do you have any idea what time it is?" 10 past cents o'clock, which you clearly missed. I bring news." "If it's about your latest haircut, spare me." "Not hair, history." He swept into the cottage, shedding raindrops and self-importance in equal measure. "I've just come from London, and you'll never guess what I've dug up about our late sainted Melissa." Agatha crossed her arms. "You've been gossiping again." "Investigating. Totally different. You'll thank me." He dropped a glossy folder on the table, grinning like a cat with a scandal instead of cream. "You actually printed something. I'm impressed." "Well, my printer did. Melissa Anstruther, or rather Melissa Harcourt, worked at a PR firm in London about 8 years ago. She was let go after a financial irregularity, embezzlement to us common folk." Agatha blinked. "You're joking." "Never about money, darling, especially other people's. She covered it up beautifully, changed her name, married our earnest vicar, and buried her past in hymn books." Agatha sank into a chair. "That explains the diary entries. If he tells, I'm finished." She wasn't being dramatic. She meant this. "Exactly. Imagine the headlines. Holy Housewife's Heavenly Fraud." "Roy, for once in your life, could you not think in capitals?" He pouted. "Honestly, Aggie, you could show a little gratitude. I risked my reputation for this information." "You haven't had one since 2003, she said, but smiled despite herself. Half an hour later, Agatha, now dressed and armed with lipstick and indignation, marched to Bill Wong's office. Roy followed like a particularly talkative shadow. "You're going to tell him," Roy said, clutching his folder. "I'm going to consider telling him." Bill looked up as they entered, already suspicious. "Oh, Lord, there are two of you." "We come bearing truth," said Roy grandly. "We come bearing irritation," corrected Agatha. "But listen, Melissa wasn't who she said she was. Roy's found proof she worked in PR under another name and was fired for stealing company funds." Bill leaned back, unimpressed. "And how exactly did you get this proof?" "I made a few calls," said Roy airily. "People remember me." "For all the wrong reasons, I imagine." Agatha tapped the folder. "This explains why she was paying Alan Trent. Maybe he found out, or maybe someone else did." Bill rubbed his forehead. "You two realize that spreading rumors about a dead woman is still defamation, right?" "It's not defamation if it's true," said Agatha. "It's still paperwork," Bill retorted, "and I'm the one who has to fill it out." "You're welcome," said Agatha, smiling sweetly. "You're incorrigible," he said, though there was fondness under the exasperation. "I'll check this with London records, and Roy, stay out of it." "I'm wounded," said Roy. "Not enough," murmured Bill. Later that afternoon, Agatha was at the Red Lion nursing a gin and tonic when Charles Fraith slid into the seat opposite her, looking irritatingly pleased with himself. "You'll never believe who I've been chatting with," he said. "You mean flirting with." "Semantics. Lawrence Fielding, our handsome pianist. I tracked him down in Oxford. Turns out he's more fraud than fugue." Agatha's eyes lit up. "Go on." "He admitted he and Melissa were lovers. She threatened to expose his fake credentials when he refused to run away with her. He was never at the Royal College of Music, only the Royal Mail sorting office." Agatha choked on her drink. Good heavens, so she was blackmailing him? Or he was blackmailing her? Take your pick. "This village is starting to feel like Fleet Street," she muttered. Charles smiled lazily. "At least it's never dull." "You think everything's entertainment," said Agatha, "and you think everything's evidence. Between us, we're unstoppable." She glared. "You're insufferable. Admit it, darling. You'd be bored without me." She ignored that, though not entirely successfully. "Did he have an alibi for the night before she died?" "Claims he was in Oxford, but I'd wager he was here. His eyes twitched when I mentioned the garden." "Excellent," said Agatha. "We'll pass that along to Bill." Charles raised an eyebrow. "We?" "Yes, we. Don't get noble on me now." Back at her cottage, Agatha relayed the story to Bill over the phone. He sounded unimpressed. "So, to summarize," he said, "Melissa was an embezzler with a secret lover who was also a fraud, and a husband who may or may not be covering for her." "That's right. And you got all this from gossip and gin?" "It's called investigative flair." "It's called chaos. Still, the pieces fit too neatly. I don't like it." "You never like anything until you've verified it 3 times, she said. "That's why I'm not constantly being threatened with lawsuits." "Speaking of which," said Agatha, "did you ever trace that warning note, the one saying leave the dead in peace? No fingerprints, no DNA, no joy. Probably just someone wanting to scare you off." "They succeeded only in making me more determined." "Yes, that's what I'm afraid of." By evening, the drizzle had thickened into proper Cotswold gloom. Roy reappeared, carrying Chinese takeaway and a sense of self-importance. "I thought we'd dine while discussing motive," he said, unpacking cartons. "After all, there's so much of it flying about." Agatha poured herself wine. "The vicar's afraid, not guilty. The pianist's a liar, and Melissa's past is crawling out of its grave." "You forgot the gardener," said Roy. "He still thinks she owed him money. Honestly, darling, it's like a Shakespearean tragedy written by the parish council." "At least it's not one of your PR campaigns," she said. He sniffed. "Those had polish." "So does brass, Roy. It doesn't mean it's valuable." "You're cross because I scooped you," he teased. "You didn't scoop anything. You stumbled upon it by accident while gossiping." "Call it what you like. I've advanced the plot." Agatha almost smiled. He wasn't wrong. A knock interrupted them. Bill stepped in, looking weary. "I've confirmed your London story," he said. "Melissa Harcourt, embezzlement charge quietly dropped after she returned the money. Changed her name soon after. The vicar either never knew or pretended not to." "And Lawrence?" asked Agatha, still claiming innocence. "Says Melissa begged him to join her new life, but he refused." "Because he's a fraud," said Charles, appearing behind Bill with his usual impeccable timing. "Good heavens, is everyone holding meetings in my kitchen now?" Agatha exclaimed. "You're the only one with central heating," said Bill dryly. Charles poured himself wine. "So, Melissa the embezzler meets Lawrence the fake maestro. They argue. She dies. Simple." "Too simple," said Bill. "She died from foxglove tea. That requires planning." Agatha frowned. What if the poison wasn't meant for her? What if someone else was supposed to drink it? Charles raised his glass. "The vicar?" "Or the pianist," said Roy. "Or even me," said Agatha. "Oh, darling," said Roy. "If anyone wanted to kill you, they'd need industrial strength." She glared, but the edge of humour softened it. Later, after the others had gone, Agatha tidied the table with uncharacteristic care. The conversation had left her restless. Every suspect seemed equally plausible, which perversely made the case feel wrong. She sat down with her notebook, flipping through her scribbles. The warning note, the diary, the missing ledger page. The threads were tightening, but into what pattern? Her eyes fell on the warning note itself, still tucked between the pages. "Leave the dead in peace." She frowned, tracing the letters with a fingertip. The typing was neat, but the spacing uniform exact. And at the bottom corner, just visible where the ribbon had struck, was a faint impression of handwriting, as though someone had handled the page before it was typed. She compared it against the vicar's secretary's neat parish minutes, still on her desk from the gala planning meeting. The loops, the spacing, identical. "Well," said Agatha softly, feeling that pleasant, dangerous stir of triumph. "Now why would the secretary be warning me off?" She poured the last of the wine, smiling to herself. It was too early to be sure, of course, but in Agatha's experience, people who spent their lives organizing other people's secrets were usually hiding one of their own. Outside, the church bells began to toll the hour. Agatha leaned back, listening. Somewhere in the night, truth was shifting its weight, and she was ready to pounce. Morning in Carsley arrived disguised as twilight, grey, chilly, and faintly disapproving. A drizzle hung in the air like gossip that refused to clear. Agatha Raisin, fortified by 2 coffees and her usual sense of self-importance, set off toward the church with purpose blazing from every step. She had slept little. All night the question had circled her mind like a wasp around jam. Why would the vicar's secretary send her that warning note? Leave the dead in peace. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. That distinction made all the difference. The church office smelled of old hymnals and disinfectant. Miss Penrose, the secretary in question, was bent over her typewriter, her prim blouse buttoned to the chin. The clatter of keys ceased the moment Agatha entered. "Mrs. Raisin," she said, her tone that of a woman greeting a tax inspector. "What can I do for you?" Agatha closed the door behind her. "You can tell me why you tried to frighten me off this investigation." A faint tremor crossed the secretary's mouth. "I don't know what you mean." Agatha held up the warning note, typed on this very machine. "Don't bother denying it. I can spot a guilty keystroke a mile away." Miss Penrose's face drained of colour. "Please," she whispered, "you don't understand." "Then enlighten me. Who were you protecting?" The woman clasped her hands so tightly the knuckles whitened. "The Reverend. He's been through enough." Agatha's voice softened, though curiosity still sharpened every word. "So you admit you wrote it?" "I had to. You were digging where you shouldn't. The police, well, they mean well, but they don't see what's at stake. Reverend Paul is a good man. He doesn't deserve this humiliation." "Humiliation for what?" Miss Penrose hesitated, then crossed herself as though bracing for sin. "For knowing. He found out what she'd done, the embezzlement, the false name. She confessed everything just before the gala, said she couldn't live with the deceit anymore. And he forgave her? At once. Said God's mercy must begin at home." Agatha blinked. "Good Lord." "He destroyed the proof, the bank statements, the letters. But Melissa, poor woman, feared it wasn't enough. She was terrified the truth would come out anyway. She begged him to keep it secret." Agatha frowned. "Then why hide the ledger page?" Miss Penrose swallowed. "Because he couldn't bring himself to do it. When the auditors came for the church fund, he hesitated. I saw his hands shaking as he turned the pages. I knew he'd falter, so I removed the one with her signature. I thought I was sparing him another scandal." "You thought wrong," said Agatha, though her tone lacked conviction. Tears welled in the secretary's eyes. She wasn't wicked, Mrs. Raisin, just frightened. She wanted to be good, to start over. but she lived in terror that someone, that awful pianist or that man at the charity shop, would expose her. Agatha's irritation began to thaw. So the Reverend knew her past and forgave her, and you were trying to protect him. That's what all this secrecy was about. Miss Penrose nodded miserably. If the papers learn she was a thief, they'll destroy him. Oh, nonsense, said Agatha briskly. Clergy scandals are as common as tea bags these days. Still, I appreciate your honesty. She turned to leave, then paused. You wouldn't happen to know whether the Reverend takes sugar in his tea, would you? The secretary blinked at the non sequitur. 1 lump, why? Just curious, said Agatha. And with that, she swept out, her mind churning faster than the clouds overhead. Outside, she found Bill Wong waiting beside his car, hands in his coat pockets, looking like a man balancing exasperation and admiration. You've been interrogating church staff again, he said, interviewing. Subtle difference. What have you got for me? Bill's expression sobered. You'd better sit down for this. Don't be dramatic, just tell me. We had the lab run secondary tests on the tea set. Traces of foxglove were found not only in Melissa's cup, but also in the Reverend's. Agatha stared. What? Both cups, but his contained only a trace. Hers had the full dose. So, he was meant to die too. That's one possibility. Or she made the tea for both, added the poison herself and misjudged the cups. Agatha shook her head. No, she was too frightened of death to plan it. She wrote in her diary about wanting to be clean, not gone. Bill nodded slowly. Then someone else intended to kill him, and she drank from the wrong cup. Dear God, said Agatha, he was the target. Looks that way. Agatha turned away, staring across the churchyard. The gravestones leaned like gossiping neighbours, listening to her thoughts. All this time, I thought jealousy or blackmail drove it. But this is personal. Bill sighed. You realise this doesn't clear anyone. If anything, it widens the field. The vicar's wife was popular, but the vicar was moral to the point of irritation, finished Agatha. Half the village resented him for making them feel small. And now someone tried to make him smaller permanently, said Bill grimly. That afternoon, Agatha sat in her cottage with Mrs. Bloxby, who had come bearing sympathy and scones. Rain pattered gently against the window panes, the sort of domestic sound that ought to soothe nerves but didn't. He was the intended victim, Agatha said, pacing. Imagine the irony. A man forgiving his wife, only for someone else to punish him for it. Mrs. Bloxby poured tea, calm as ever. We can't be certain yet. Oh, it fits, said Agatha. Melissa's fear, her diary entry. If he tells, I'm finished. Everyone assumed he meant a lover or blackmailer. But it was her husband. She feared his confession, not her own. Perhaps, said Mrs. Bloxby gently, she feared his honesty more than his anger. Agatha stopped pacing. Yes, because he'd tell the truth, and the truth would ruin her. He couldn't lie, even for love. Poor souls, murmured Mrs. Bloxby, both of them prisoners of conscience. Agatha snorted softly. You make it sound poetic. I call it tragic idiocy. You always do, until it touches your heart, said Mrs. Bloxby with a smile. Agatha tried to glare, failed, and poured herself another cup. Evening brought Charles Fraith breezing in with his usual combination of cologne and unwanted confidence. Heard the latest twist, he said, sinking onto her sofa. The poison was meant for the vicar, wasn't it? Seems that way, said Agatha. Well, I could have told you that. Men of moral superiority always attract homicidal feelings. You're one to talk, she said. Exactly. That's why I keep you around, to keep me humble. Agatha rolled her eyes. The secretary confessed to hiding the ledger page, by the way. Really? I hope you gave her a medal. Don't mock. She did it to protect him, not herself. Charles tilted his head. So we have a saint who forgave, a sinner who repented, and a killer who can't tell the difference between teacups. Almost biblical. Don't make me throw this biscuit at you, said Agatha. You wouldn't waste good pastry. He smiled, but she wasn't smiling back. Her eyes were fixed on the window, where the rain streaked silver down the glass. You know, she said slowly, I keep thinking about that tea. Who poured it? Melissa, presumably. And where? In the vicarage kitchen. Anyone could have tampered with it. The maid, the gardener, a visiting parishioner. But only someone who knew their habits would know which cup was his. And she drank his instead, said Charles. Precisely. 1 lump of sugar, same as hers. If they looked identical, it could have been chance. Charles stretched. So, accidental homicide. Or divine intervention, said Agatha darkly. You're almost poetic tonight. Don't start. Bill dropped by later, looking worn. He stood in the doorway, rain dripping from his coat. You were right, he said without preamble. The Reverend was the target. We found 2 things on the teapot, Bill said. Old fingerprints from Alan Trent when he made earlier tea, and fresh foxglove residue that doesn't match him. Agatha frowned. The ex-convict from the charity shop. Yes, says he brought over a donation that morning and made tea while she was on the phone. Claims she insisted, but he swears he never added anything. He could be telling the truth, said Agatha. Melissa might have reused the pot later. Possibly. But why would she? The stuff was steeped long enough to kill. Agatha folded her arms. He's lying about something, but I doubt he's the killer. He doesn't have the finesse. Poisoners are tidy people. Bill half smiled. Like you. Don't tempt fate, Wong, he hesitated. We'll question the vicar again tomorrow. He's barely eating, looks haunted. He's living proof that forgiveness is bad for the digestion, said Agatha. Bill shook his head. Try not to interfere, please. Me, said Agatha innocently. He gave her a look. Yes, you. When he left, Agatha remained by the fire, thoughts spiralling. Everyone had secrets, but only one made sense of them all. The vicar forgave his wife, but couldn't save her. Melissa feared exposure, but died protecting him. And somewhere in that pious tragedy, a killer's hand had trembled, or not trembled enough. She picked up the diary once more, its lavender scent faint but persistent. The final pages were blotted with emotion, words slanting like a confession rushed and unfinished. If he tells, I'm finished. Agatha traced the line with a fingertip. He, not a blackmailer, not a lover, her husband. She looked toward the church spire, just visible beyond the hedge, pale in the rain. You poor fool, she murmured. You were trying to save her soul, and she died saving your reputation. The clock ticked softly. Outside, the drizzle thickened again, turning the world to blur. Charles reappeared in the doorway, coat slung over his arm. Still at it, I see. Go away, said Agatha without heat. He came closer, studying her face. You look almost sorry for them. I am, she said quietly. They loved each other in the wrong way. Too much honesty on one side, too much fear on the other. And which side would you be on, my dear Agatha? She looked up, half smiling. Both, probably. I'm capable of dreadful honesty and spectacular deceit. Charles chuckled. That's what makes you interesting. No, said Agatha, closing the diary. That's what makes me dangerous. Outside, the church bell chimed 8 times, soft and solemn. Agatha raised her glass to the sound, the glint of irony returning to her eyes. To truth, she said, however poisonous it may be. The day began with deceptive brightness, the kind of spring sunlight that flatters everything except human motives. By morning, Agatha had settled on a plan she trusted more than patience. If the truth wouldn't come out naturally, she would force it into the open, with the faintly grim satisfaction of a general before battle. It's all about authenticity, declared Roy Silver, positioning his phone camera like a Hollywood director on a shoestring. We'll call it Recreating the Fatal Tea. Agatha Raisin investigates. Think of the engagement metrics. Think of your unemployment metrics if you post it before I approve it, said Agatha. He grinned. Honestly, darling, you're missing the viral potential. Hashtag Justice for Melissa. Hashtag Raisin Reveals. Hashtag Shut Up, she said, adjusting the lace cloth on the table. Charles Fraith lounged in a chair nearby, expression lazy and amused. You realize, my dear, that you're about to invite the local clergy to a crime reenactment. Only you could turn a murder investigation into dinner theatre. If it gets results, said Agatha, I'll stage it in Westminster Abbey. She checked her props. 2 identical teacups, one slightly chipped, a silver teapot polished to mirror brightness, and a small vase containing, for dramatic realism, a few sprigs of foxglove freshly cut from the garden. Symbolism, Roy whispered approvingly. Evidence, corrected Agatha, and don't you dare knock it over. At precisely 4 o'clock, Reverend Paul Anstruther arrived, looking wan but determined, the moral equivalent of a man walking to the gallows with Bible in hand. "Mrs. Raisin," he said gravely, removing his hat, "you said you wished to discuss Melissa's final moments." "Indeed," said Agatha with a flourish toward the table. "We're recreating the tea as it happened that day. Call it a practical experiment. Sit there, Vicar, cup on your right." He obeyed, bewildered but polite. Charles poured tea with exaggerated ceremony, while Roy muttered commentary under his breath. The cup placement, the sugar, the innocence of the setting, it's all terribly cinematic, he said. "This isn't cinema," said Agatha. "It's truth." "Same thing," said Roy. The vicar's hands trembled slightly as he stirred his cup. "I don't see how this can help." "You said Melissa prepared the tea that day," said Agatha. "You took your usual seat. She sat opposite. The cups were identical, yes?" "Yes." "And you always take 1 lump of sugar?" "That's right." "Then anyone who knew your habits could have predicted exactly which cup was yours." A faint shudder crossed his face. "You mean—" But before he could finish, the door burst open. The gardener, Mr. Craddock, stood there in muddy boots and fury. "What's the meaning of this?" he barked. "Your man from the council's taken my tools." Agatha blinked. "What on earth are you talking about?" "Inspector Wong's orders," he said, brandishing his gloved hands, "says I'm under temporary investigation. It's an outrage." "That'll be the best thing that's happened to my azaleas in years," said Agatha coolly. "Don't mock me, woman. You've stirred up nothing but trouble since you came sniffing round that garden." "Funny," said Agatha, eyeing his gloves. "You're awfully protective of that garden for someone who treats it like a landfill." "Someone has to keep it in order," he muttered. "Including the foxgloves." He froze. Agatha took a step closer. "Because I notice you've got purple stains on your gloves. Same shade as the ones Bill found on the teapot handle." "Paint," he said quickly. "Don't insult me," she snapped. "You've been handling foxglove leaves, poisonous stuff. Causes the skin to stain before it kills." His eyes flicked nervously to the vicar, then back. "You can't prove anything." "Can't I?" said Agatha. "You were owed money by Melissa. You admitted it yourself. You went to collect that night." "I didn't." "You did," said Agatha. "And when she refused to pay, you lost your temper. She threatened to tell the vicar you'd been stealing from the church fund, because that's what she found, wasn't it? Not a debt owed to you, but one you owed to them." "Lies," he spat. "Oh, I think not. You'd been pocketing the garden supply reimbursements. Maintenance materials, wasn't it? She found the invoices. You begged her to keep quiet." The gardener's face darkened. "You don't know what she was like. Always talking down to me, acting holy. Said she'd ruin me, tell everyone I was a thief." "So you brewed the tea," said Agatha, her voice low. "You meant to poison the vicar. Thought he'd be the one to drink it." "He deserved it," the man shouted. "All of them. Their smug faces, their pity. She said she'd expose me that night. I only meant to scare her, to teach them a lesson. But she drank first." The vicar rose to his feet, horrified. You tried to kill me." "It was never about you," Craddock cried, near tears now. "She was going to tell you about the missing money, and you'd have sacked me. I didn't want to kill her, I swear. I thought she'd pour your cup." "Then she poured the wrong one," said Agatha softly. "And you killed the only person who might have forgiven you." He sagged against the doorframe, the fight gone. At that moment, Bill Wong stepped out from behind the hallway arch, recorder in hand. "We've got enough," he said quietly. Charles, ever the dramatist, applauded lightly. "Nicely staged, Aggie. Almost Shakespearean." "You mean tragic with good lighting," said Agatha. Roy, still filming, whispered, "Darling, this'll get 1 million views." "Delete that video or I'll poison your latte," she said. Bill led the trembling gardener away while the vicar sank into a chair, pale as parchment. An hour later, the house was quiet again. The tea things had been cleared, the drama reduced to echo. Agatha stood by the window, arms folded, watching rain return to the garden, soft, forgiving rain that washed nothing truly clean. Charles brought her a glass of wine. "Congratulations, you've unmasked yet another sinner in sensible shoes." "Hardly something to toast," said Agatha. "A woman's dead, a man's ruined, and the vicar's faith is hanging by a thread." "You sound almost remorseful," he said. "Don't flatter yourself. I'm just tired." "Of what?" "Of people pretending to be better than they are," she said, "and of myself for pretending it doesn't matter." He smiled faintly. "You're improving, Aggie. Self-awareness suits you." "Don't push it." Roy reappeared from the kitchen, phone still in hand. "I blurred the gardener's face," he announced proudly. "Ethical journalism." "Roy," said Agatha, "if that footage ever leaks, I'll make sure you're trending under missing persons." He pouted. "Honestly, you have no appreciation for modern media." "And you have no appreciation for tact," she retorted. Bill returned, removing his hat. "He's confessed formally," he said. "The lab will confirm the stains on his gloves. He thought Melissa would tell the vicar about his thefts, so he brewed foxglove tea for the Reverend. She must have poured the cups out of habit, his cup for herself." Agatha sighed. "Poetic justice, if one's in a morbid mood." "Or just human stupidity," said Bill. "That too." He hesitated. "The Reverend asked if you'd speak to him. He's struggling." "Of course he is," said Agatha. "He forgave her, only to learn forgiveness wasn't enough." "He said she'd have forgiven him anything," Bill added quietly. Agatha looked away. Then they deserved each other. She found the vicar in the garden room, the same one where it had happened. He was seated at the table, hands folded, staring at the empty space where the teapot had stood. "Mrs. Raisin," he said without looking up, "you were right." "I'm rarely wrong," she said, but her tone was gentle. "She died for my mistake. I should have told the truth about her past. I thought I was protecting her, and perhaps myself." "You couldn't have known," said Agatha. "But I should have," he murmured. "I preached honesty, yet practiced concealment, and she bore the punishment meant for me." Agatha said nothing. The silence filled the room like incense, heavy, mournful, strangely comforting. At last he looked up. "Do you believe in redemption, Mrs. Raisin?" "For others sometimes," she said. "For myself, not often." "You're kinder than you admit." "Don't tell anyone. It would ruin my reputation." He managed a faint smile. "Thank you." Agatha left him to his prayers, though she suspected they would be quieter than before, and less certain. Outside, dusk had settled over Castley. The rain had stopped, leaving the hedges glistening and the air smelling of wet earth and foxglove. Charles walked her home, umbrella tilted gallantly. "Another case closed," he said. "You must admit, Aggie, there's something perversely fitting about it. A gardener sowing death where he was meant to tend life." "You make it sound literary," she said. "It was just greed and temper. Ordinary sins, really." "Ordinary sins make the world turn," said Charles. "And keep me employed," said Agatha. They reached her gate. She paused, gazing back toward the dim outline of the church spire. "You know," she said, "I almost liked Melissa. For all her self-righteousness, she wanted to be good." "She nearly was," said Charles, "and she paid the price for trying." Agatha turned to him, the faintest smile tugging at her mouth. "Trust the church," she said, "to make murder seem respectable." He laughed softly, and together they stepped inside, the door closing on the drizzle, the gossip, and the lingering scent of foxglove, that curious perfume of beauty, danger, and misplaced faith. Morning came soft and grey, as though the Cotswolds themselves had decided to lower their voices after all the recent drama. Castley had resumed its usual rhythms, the clatter of milk bottles, the hum of gossip from behind curtains, the faint smell of toast from cottagers trying to be virtuous before second breakfast. Agatha Raisin stood at her window, coffee in hand, surveying the village with an expression of proprietary satisfaction. It was not every week one solved a murder, and simultaneously preserved the moral reputation of the Church of England. She had already been to the newsagent, where Mrs. Witherspoon had breathlessly shown her the latest Evesham Echo. "Amateur sleuth saves vicar from scandal," Agatha read aloud. "Oh, for heaven's sake, they make it sound like I handed him a halo and a tissue." "You did clear his name, dear," said Mrs. Witherspoon, glowing with admiration. "And got accused of trespassing twice," Agatha muttered, folding the paper. The headline, of course, was courtesy of Roy Silver, who had written a lurid piece for one of his London magazines. "Agatha Raisin, heroine or hazard?" it demanded in bold type, illustrated with an unflattering photo of her mid-gesture. She had phoned him at once. "You made me sound deranged," she'd snapped. "Darling, you're iconic," he'd replied. "Besides, madness gets clicks. People love a dangerous woman in tweed." Now, over her second coffee, Agatha reflected that perhaps she didn't entirely mind. It was nice, in a perverse way, to be both feared and famous. The village, meanwhile, was still adjusting to the scandal's aftertaste. The Reverend Anstruther had returned to his duties, thinner, but strangely steadier. His sermons were quieter now, less about virtue, more about mercy. Mrs. Bloxby said the congregation listened better when guilt was shared equally. Bill Wong dropped by that afternoon, cheerful for once. "You've done it again, Mrs. Raisin," he said, and miraculously without causing international incident. "Barely," she replied. "I thought you were going to arrest me for harassment halfway through." "Tempting," he said, sipping his tea, "but I'll admit, you were right about Craddock. The fingerprints matched. He's already pleaded guilty." "Serves him right," said Agatha. "Imagine poisoning a man over garden tools and church petty cash. At least when I'm cross, I confine myself to sarcasm." Bill smiled. "Still, it's shaken people. Everyone keeps asking how you knew." "Instinct," she said modestly, then couldn't resist adding, "and superior intelligence." "Of course," he said dryly. "Though between you and me, I'm fairly certain half the village thinks you're a witch." "Good," said Agatha. "Might keep them polite, later at Mrs. Bloxby's cosy vicarage kitchen. Calm had resumed its rightful throne. The kettle purred, the scones were perfect, and the air smelled faintly of lavender and forgiveness. "You must feel proud," said Mrs. Bloxby, pouring tea. Agatha shrugged. "Pride's not the word. Relief, maybe. I was starting to think every time I involve myself in a murder, the police add a new rule to stop me." "You have a gift, Agatha," said Mrs. Bloxby warmly. "Not everyone sees through appearances so keenly." Agatha smiled wryly. It's easy to see through people when one's been disappointed by them often enough. "You're too harsh on yourself," said Mrs. Bloxby. "Nonsense. I'm delightful company, in small doses." She reached for a scone. "Do you know what I think Melissa's real crime was?" "Do tell." "Perfection," said Agatha. "The village never forgave her for seeming too good. People can stand wickedness. It gives them something to talk about. But goodness, it's unbearable. Makes them feel shabby." Mrs. Bloxby's eyes softened. "That's a sad truth." "It's also why I'll never be murdered in Carsley," said Agatha briskly. "I'm far too imperfect." They both laughed. After a pause, Mrs. Bloxby said, "The Reverend sends his thanks. He said you reminded him that justice, though painful, is part of grace." Agatha sniffed. "I prefer gin to grace personally. It's more reliable." By evening, she was back at home, enjoying a small glow of self-congratulation and an even smaller one of loneliness. The phone rang. "Aggie, darling," came Roy's effervescent voice. "You've gone viral again. They're calling you the Cotswold Sleuth." "They were calling me interfering menace last week," said Agatha. "Public perception, my dear, is a mood, not a fact. Enjoy it while it lasts." "Oh, and Charles rang me. He's got plans for you." "What sort of plans?" "Didn't say. Something about Bath, a weekend and recovery." Agatha's brows rose. "Bath, eh? Probably another of his tedious charity balls." "You adore them." "I endure them," she corrected, but smiled after hanging up. The next morning brought a brisk knock at her door. Charles stood there, immaculate as ever, holding a bouquet of lilies and a grin. "You look remarkably unpoisoned," he said. "That's because I make my own tea," said Agatha. "Then you're ready for adventure. I've booked us a weekend in Bath, purely restorative, of course." "Purely," she echoed. "You need a change of scene, fresh scandal, new pastries." "You're incorrigible. And you love it." Agatha considered him for a moment. "Bath, you say?" "Indeed. Roman heritage, Georgian architecture, and a hotel bar with scandalous martinis." She sighed theatrically. "Very well, but only because I feel it's my civic duty to prevent you embarrassing yourself in public." "My guardian angel," said Charles. "More like your parole officer," said Agatha. As they drove out of Carsley, the village slipped behind them, quiet now, but humming with speculation as always. Mrs. Witherspoon was already telling the butcher that Agatha had been secretly recruited by Scotland Yard. The butcher, for his part, thought she was dating Bill Wong. Neither was entirely wrong. Agatha, gazing out at the rolling fields, felt that odd post-case emptiness creeping in, the silence after excitement, the stillness after the storm. She'd never admit it aloud, but solving murders was the only time she felt truly alive. "Penny for your thoughts," said Charles. "They're worth more than that," she replied. "Still about the vicar?" "A little," she admitted. "I keep thinking how he forgave her completely. I don't know whether that makes him noble or foolish." "Probably both," said Charles. "The line between the two is terribly thin." She smiled faintly. "Well, I prefer my morality less exhausting. Give me vanity and a good hair appointment any day." "And yet," said Charles, glancing at her fondly, "you keep choosing justice." "Justice looks better in print," she said, turning to watch the road ahead. The sky was clearing, the hills greening again. Somewhere in the distance Bath waited, and Agatha suspected fresh trouble with better lighting. "Where there's Bath," she murmured half to herself, "there's scandal." "And where there's scandal," said Charles, grinning, "there's you." Agatha raised her chin, pleased. "Exactly.